The first generation KTM 1290 Super Duke R. It is a very important bike in the history of hypernakeds.
But this one in particular is very different to ride.
That's because back here, the rear tire is 50mm wider than stock, and this front tire is 20mm wider than stock.
You've probably already spotted the other obvious visual differences, like the custom exhaust, the custom painted plastics and frame, and the clip-on handlebars that make it look awesome and unique.
But don't forget that KTM knew what they were doing when they built this bike. So why would you want to mess with it? Has customizing it to this extent brought out more quirks? Can its 106 pound-feet of torque still rewire your brain? Can it still lap a racetrack faster than a Hayabusa while producing the same amount of torque as a Hayabusa? And is the owner of this bike dead to KTM?
I have so many questions, so to find out, I get to spend the next 127 hours with this thick chick. Thank you to Insta360 for sponsoring this video.
My approach to motorcycle engineering has always been this. Manufacturers build bikes the best way they possibly can, and every decision they make has been researched and calculated. Nothing is by accident, and this includes wheel and tire sizes. However, there are 3 exceptions to this rule. Number 1, regulations. Take an exhaust, for example. Manufacturers are forced to comply with noise and emission regulations. So if I swap it out for an aftermarket exhaust, the bike will obviously be better. Number 2, appearance. Maybe you don't like the look of stock mirrors and prefer bar end mirrors, for example. Maybe you want to change the color of the bike or get the wheels painted. This doesn't affect the function of the bike, just appeals to your taste. And number 3, financial limitations. For example, any bike would handle better with light carbon fiber wheels, but this would drive the price of the bike up substantially. So it's really hard to justify doing this, hence why so few manufacturers do it and on so few models. But other than those 3 reasons to modify a bike, I've never seen a reason to go further than that. But luckily, not everyone is as boring as I am, and some people are happy to tamper with bikes that I would consider perfect straight from the factory.
So when the owner of the Super Duke offered to let me ride his bike for a few days, I jumped at the chance to experience something I wouldn't normally gravitate towards. And I got to strap on an Insta360 X4 camera to get beautiful 8K 360-degree shots to share the experience with you guys.
If the name Scarlet Customs on the tire lettering looks familiar to you, that's because it's the shop here in Pretoria, South Africa that painted the wheels and swing arm on my CBR 1000RR project. And this KTM is the owner Naldo's personal show bike. And that is the other reason to customize a bike that I have never even thought about, because I don't own a bike shop. This is kind of like a marketing bike. This is a bike that he can take to bike shows to show the world what he is capable of doing. And building something out of the ordinary will stand out 10 times more than something you see every day. And I think that was the goal with this bike.
If the way this bike looked hadn't tipped me off that it was customized, pushing it around would have. You can immediately feel the extra weight from the bigger rear wheel and tires. And the bike just wants to stand up vertically with that squarer rear tire with a bigger contact patch.
There's no doubt that it looks cool. It looks more aggressive than a stock Super Duke with the fat tires, and the color scheme kind of looks like a stock Super Duke that was just desaturated. So let me give you a proper look around this bike, and then we'll take it for a ride.
Most notably are those tires. The front is a 140 section, which is 20mm wider than stock.
Or about the width of a donut if you don't use the metric system. But as far as I know, the rim itself is still stock, besides being painted orange with a black stripe.
However, the front mudguard actually had to be trimmed so it doesn't rub the bigger tire. Plus, it's got the Joker airbrushed onto it. The rear tire is then a 240 section compared to a stock 190.
Which feels about the width of a football field for you Americans. So to accept this tire, the rim itself also had to be widened by 50mm. And now look just how close the tire sits to the chain, but by some miracle, it doesn't actually rub.
The next biggest handling difference are these clip-on handlebars instead of the stock traditional handlebars that get mounted to the top triple clamp with bar risers. Keeping in the cockpit, it also has winglets that double as mirrors but do both jobs pretty poorly. Then there are lever guards on each side and shorty levers with custom textured paint. And finally, it has modern looking transparent brake fluid reservoirs, which I'm always a fan of. From the front, you can see the LED indicators that double as white running lights. The Brembo calipers have been painted black with red lettering, front and back. And even the fork sliders have been painted black. Plus, it has brake and clutch lines with custom fittings that are a nice touch. The frame and subframe is now a metallic grey, and although I love orange KTM frames, this works really well in my opinion and even matches the engine. The plastics have all been sprayed matte black with light grey KTM logos, and there's another airbrush joker on the rear seat cowl.
As for the motor, it's stock, but interestingly, it has almost 60,000 kilometers on it, which is impressive considering that currently KTM are struggling with camshaft durability. So clearly, these OG 1290s are solid engines.
The clutch and stator covers, however, have been blacked out, which makes the custom exhaust stand out even more. It's nothing extreme, with just some pretty welds and exits under the bike, which I appreciate, since a lot of Super Duke exhausts go over the top. The rear shock body has been painted this deep red to match the brake line fittings, and even the spring has been painted black.
It's always fun to see how other people customize their bikes. Personally, I've never been a fan of airbrushed art on a motorcycle, but I do still appreciate the talent, time and effort that it takes to be done. I sure as hell couldn't do it. And again, this comes back to standing out at a show and showing off what you can do. Normally, when I get the chance to ride a new bike, I head for my favorite twisty roads. But to be honest, I was a little skeptical about how this would handle. So I chose a ride with mostly straight roads. Trellis frames not only look amazing, but they also make mounting Insta360 cameras to them with a clamp quick and easy.
I made sure to add a selfie stick to get a better angle, since the X4 gets the widest field of view possible, and then I hit record.
It doesn't even matter which way the lenses are pointing, because it sees everything.
And I can just reframe the shots after my ride on the couch. I can even get multiple angles from one shot, and recrop it vertically for Instagram or horizontally for here on YouTube. So the only thing I had to worry about was getting this bike around corners, since the X4 automatically gets rid of the selfie stick from the shot as well. And I'll be honest, it took me a minute to get used to this bike. The extra weight is immediately noticeable, and it requires more effort and input to get it to tip into a corner. The clip-ons are nice because they let you lean over a bit more like a sport bike, since they're lower and further away from the rider. But they're a bit too narrow in my opinion, especially since extra leverage is needed with the added turning resistance.
As always, you'll receive a free gift with your Insta360 camera, like an extra battery or a selfie stick, if you order one through my affiliate link down in the description. Currently, they're also running Christmas holiday sales, so there's no better time to start capturing your rides. So think about it. The front tire is now heavier. The rear tire is now heavier, and even the rear rim is now heavier because of the extra material. And all of this mass is unsprung weight because it's below the suspension, and it's mass that rotates.
So at times, it feels like the weight of the front tire pulls the handlebars more than the average bike, and the rear tire's bigger contact patch wants the bike to be stood upright rather than leaned over. Of course, it's still a Super Duke. It still has tons of torque, which is exhilarating.
Even if it now has more mass to spin up. But technically, we should get less wheel spin now because it has more traction.
It's also a head turner out on the road. And of course, that big V-twin sounds phenomenal.
But those are the things that I already knew. So even if I don't mention every last amazing thing about the Super Duke, it's because I expected those things to be there. and I wanted to focus on the unexpected.
Just the other day, I had the privilege of testing the new 1390 Super Duke, which is one of the best bikes I've ever ridden. It's much easier to grip with your knees than the first gen, which makes a huge difference to control it. But on the way back, I was finally getting more confident on it and getting used to how it handled. I think the best way to describe it is that firstly, it just requires more effort to throw around, but also that it performs brilliantly in just a smaller window.
It doesn't like the extremes. If you go through a corner too fast or too slow, or the corner is too tight, that is when you will notice the extra size and weight. But if you keep everything average, that is when it feels normal. It just has a smaller window in which it operates perfectly. This is one of those experiences that I'd never stopped to think about the implications of wider wheels. And now I got to experience it firsthand, which is the best way to do it.
I also find it funny that a bike from 2016 now feels a tad old with the analog tack and no quick shifter. And that's largely KTM's fault, because they've been the ones pushing technology forward so quickly.
So 127 hours later, let's see where a custom 1290 Super Duke would stack up on the board for interest's sake. Styling. Like I said, it's not what I would choose, but based on uniqueness and effort, it's gotta be 8 out of 10. Practicality. There's not much practicality to begin with a 1300cc engine in a motorcycle, and then you add even bigger and more expensive tires, 4 out of 10. Fun. From a riding perspective, I personally think it's less fun than stock. But if the fun aspect for you is building a bike, then that's a completely different ballgame. 7 out of 10. Price. Anything custom is pretty tricky. It's worth a ton to the owner, and it's worthless to someone who doesn't appreciate it. 6 out of 10. Speed. It might still be faster than most bikes in a straight line, but it does fall a bit short in the corners now. 6 out of 10. Sound. Everybody loves a free-flowing V-twin. 8 out of 10.
Giving a heavily customized 1290 Super Duke 39 out of 60.
Which places it perfectly between an R1200 GS and the MV Agusta Turismo Veloce, which also happens to be the order that I would pick these bikes if I chose one to ride on a daily basis. And you'll also notice that the 1390 Super Duke is still topping the board. But since this 1290 Super Duke is not stock, it's not actually allowed on the board. But anyway, let me know if you would pick this over a stock Super Duke. Thank you to Scarlett Customs for the new experience. I'll link his details down below, and I'll see you on the next ride.